This is Robert Stark. I'm joined here with Anatoly Karlin. It's great having you back on the show.
Yep.
It's mutual.
Yep. It's going to be a fun talk.
And I'm also joined here with my co-host, Pilleater. I don't think you guys have met.
No, we have not met before. It's the first time talking to you.
So what sort of pills do you eat, Pilleater?
Red pills, blue pills, some
No, not black pills? Some black
Any pills, so as long as that makes sense to the truth, so.
Okay.
So, Anatoly, you're in England right now, and you're returning to Russia. I got a chance to meet up with you in person in Berkeley, like, right before you left.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about why you decided to leave the country and go back to Russia?
Everybody's telling me go back to Russia, Kami, so why not act on it, right? To answer it seriously, I want to rediscover my roots, to recover my identity, as somebody like Richard Spencer might say, I guess. And that's one of the reasons. The second reason is that most of my income is really sourced on the internet, and has been for a long time now. And a dollar takes you much further in terms of purchasing power in Russia than it does in the United States, especially in the Bay Area, for that matter. So those are the big two.
Are you moving to Russia permanently, or you may come back in the future?
Nothing's decided. I like traveling about. I've got wanderlust, so can't really say anything at this point.
So you wrote this article called My American Decade, and this article you talk about your experience in America, how the nation has changed, but also you talk about your travels across the country and your observation of different places.
Yes, so one of the observations that I made is that in general terms, the U.S. has become remarkably a lot more like Europe is. This was a pretty startling phenomenon. So if you recall, back in the 2000s, people were writing books like Americans are from Mars, Europeans are from Venus. One guy, T.R. Reid, wrote a book called The United States of Europe, in which he argued that the EU was going to be the next big thing. It was going to be the soft power superpower, and that people were going to rush to join it, that it was another model of power. So I guess that didn't really work out, as the past 5 years especially have shown. What were the permanent crises you have in the Eurozone?
Focus on the Obama decade. When you first came here, was this you came to this country during the Bush era, or you?
The twilight of the Bush era, I would say, yes. So basically 2006.
How is America similar to that of a European country now, as compared to 10 years ago when it was ruled by Bush, and compared to Obama?
So there's been a lot of developments. So like what defined America relative to Europe back in the 2000s? Well, you could guns, family, religion, patriotism, fertility, militarism, and the distinct lack of homosexualist histrionics. That's one way of putting it. And across all those, most of those aspects, it has really Europeanized quite a lot. So, I mean, back then it was the French were the cheese-eating slender monkeys, and it was the Americans who were gung-ho about bringing democracy to the Middle East and all that sort of nonsense. But by the early 2010s, even, when it was France who was the biggest opponent of toppling Gaddafi, and later on the same with Syria. It was Obama who was actually the stained person amongst the U.S. and France and Britain.
She was saying the architect of the toppling Gaddafi, it was more Sarkozy than Obama.
Oh yeah, I think that's pretty obvious. Yes. I mean, Obama was very skeptical about these sorts of foreign interventions. There was that profile long article in the Atlantic, I think it was a few months ago, in which it was, they basically described that it was the Hillary Clinton and the clique around her who were the big regime changes, and the so-called liberal interventionists. It was Obama who was pretty cold on that.
One observation you've made is that American politics have become more like European politics. Traditionally, we've had two parties, a kind of plutocratic Republican Party and an establishment Democratic Party as well. But now even though we still have two parties in name, but ideologically there's basically four major factions. There is this sort of neoliberal Democratic Party of Hillary Clinton, which kind of combines neoliberalism with left-wing social views. You have Bernie Sanders' movement, which is focused on like economic leftism, and then you have like mainstream corporate conservatism, and then you have Trump's movement, which represents a resurgence in nationalism similar to a lot of European politicians.
Nationalism,
like
protectionism, yes, the Front National in France, yes.
What I know about America is that, there is the support of free speech, where compared to European countries, you really don't have free speech, and you could probably go to jail if you, say, deny the Holocaust or say any use of the swastika. What is the difference between Europe and America, and how does free speech impact that in America?
So traditionally, the First Amendment is a really big thing in the United States. It's pretty foundational, and it is not in a lot of European countries. So traditionally, the United States has been much more welcoming of free speech. I mean, at the legal level, at least, you could argue that perhaps
but you could, lose your
saying claiming communist ideology in the 1950s or whatever might not have been such a good idea, obviously, but at the legal level, it does seem to have a better track record than Europe on this. But if you look at the opinion polls, especially amongst college students, who are the future elites almost by definition, in 20 or 30 years' time, support for free speech amongst them has been declining. If you look at the polls, so will this sort of thing continue? Will this American sort of quote unquote American exceptionalism continue, or will it converge to the sort of arrangements that you have in Europe? Well, I'd say there's a good chance that it's going to be the latter.
And with free speech, I mean, you're not going to go to jail for your views, but people can lose their jobs, and that can still have a devastating effect if they become unemployable.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, economic consequences. I mean, that has always been the case with the United States, and it's nothing new, really. So back in the early 1950s, advocating communist ideology wasn't a very good idea for your economic prospects in the United States. For well-known historical reasons, and nowadays the political orthodoxy is political correctness and social justice, and if you substantially go against that view, then yes, you might run into economic troubles, but not so much legal trouble, direct legal trouble, like you might in some European countries.
I talked about this on a previous show I did on the election, like an election roundtable, but you do see some trends in politics where, so one hand, social conservatism is declining, but also social conservatives, like the religious right types, they're becoming more populist economically. With the Republican Party, obviously, you still see a tremendous amount of influence from corporations and Wall Street, like Trump his pick for Treasury was from Goldman Sachs, and he's advocating a lot of supply-side economics. But despite that, there still is this kind of a trend towards economic populism. And you saw what Trump did with preventing that carrier company from going to Mexico and preventing the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So could you see the future of the GOP, or at least a significant portion, becoming kind of a centrist nationalism, similar to a lot of those European parties, combining national sovereignty and immigration restriction with more centrist views on economics and social issues, as opposed to kind of generic conservatism, which is focused on free market economics and social conservatism?
Well, yeah, certainly, obviously. I mean, the really big thing that you have to realize is that the United States, the left has won the culture war, full stop. So even Trump is visibly for gay marriage, even though ironically Germany doesn't have gay marriage. So I mean, it's made this very big leap to the left on the cultural side, and I think we can pretty much definitively say that the social liberals have won, and it's no longer a matter of discussion. Is that the leftists they're stuck in this rut in which they, especially the Clintonistas, they want to go on and on and on further to the left while actually screwing over ordinary people, and the ordinary people they've a substantial amount of them, especially those have been worse affected by globalization. They've said, screw that, okay, you've won your culture war, but at least give me my share of the pie. So, and this is why you have this mass lift of the working class, the Dust Belt towards economic nationalism. Incidentally, this is very similar to what is happening in France, by the way. A lot of their Dust Belts have been migrating from the socialists to the National Front in recent years.
I know you posted a map of your election predictions. I think you predicted Trump winning Ohio, but you didn't. You actually predicted Hillary winning Michigan, Wisconsin, and I think even Pennsylvania.
Yes, well, I thought it was going to be very close. So if I could just look at that map again, it's let's MAGA, not war. So I predicted that. So I actually thought that Michigan would go red, which is perhaps the most impressive prediction out of. And
you saw that same trend with Brexit, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I did think that Trump's support was going to be massively more weighted towards the Dust Belt states than it was towards the traditionally conservative areas. And in general terms, that played out, even though I was wrong on the specifics, and I did think that Clinton would win, but. Although not by the huge margins that many liberals were hoping for, but it turned out much better than I expected, and than pretty much everyone expected. So overall, I was pretty happy to be wrong on that.
As far as Trump's economic policies go, do you see him as being more populist or more kind of mainstream conservative supply side economics, or do you see kind of a hybrid of both? And I've even heard people make the same comparison to Putin's economic policies, because he did have that pick from Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, just for context, in Russia you do have substantial protectionism. You have much more in the way of state ownership of some companies, but you also have a flat tax rate, which is like this holy grail of libertarian economists in the United States for the past few decades. So it's a pretty peculiar melange that you have in Russia in that respect. And yes, I mean, I think that's going to be the same with Trump. So he's going to take a more will have more of an industrial policy aimed specifically at keeping jobs, at reviving U.S. manufacturing, resourcing, some people have called it, and I think also controlling migration would actually can be directly linked to that, because if you have fewer migrants depressing wages, then wages are going to go up. There'll be more pressure for automation, and with more automation, the United States might become more competitive for the sort of manufacturing jobs that it's been blazing out for the past couple of decades.
And if you look at income inequality, like, even though I disagree with Trump about cutting taxes, like, for the top 1%, I think the crucial issues with income inequality are immigration and trade. Those are like the main issues.
I would point out, so the main measure of income inequality is the Gini index of income inequality, which in the United States is around 40. In most of Europe, it's around 30 or even 25. In the really social countries like Sweden.
Well, I've heard America's inequality level is comparable to a lot of third world countries.
Well, I mean, Latin America is more unequal, actually. It's the Gini index in Brazil, for instance, is around 60. The Gini index in the United States is around 40, and it's also 40 in China and in Russia, incidentally. It's about in the middle of the world, though it is high by first world standards.
Like, I would assume California might be on the 60 index.
Yeah, California is more unequal. But there's a couple of things, though, to bear in mind. First of all, so bigger countries tend to have more extremes of wealth. So and the United States is a very big, very differentiated country. That's the first thing to bear in mind. And the second thing is that it's a very ethnically and racially heterogeneous country, and this is also a pretty important aspect. If you adjust for race inequalities, then it's safe to say that U.S. inequality relative to will go substantially down.
I was thinking about economy and just going back a bit about you said something about how marijuana is now legal or half of the United States. Would that would that actually benefit Trump's presidency right now and this future campaign, if that has something to do with the economy? It's been actually talked about legalization of marijuana.
Heath Preston actually, I think it was Heath Preston, but someone suggested that if Trump came out in favor of legalized marijuana, it would basically shut down the whole kind of a spoiler effect that Gary Johnson had and absorb a lot of libertarian-leaning voters. I mean, I voted for the marijuana ballot initiative in California.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I support marijuana legalization. I don't really like weed very much myself, but yeah, if people like it, I support legalizing LSD as well, mushrooms and stuff. Yeah. He'll take away for libertarians, but we also have to consider though that there's still hardcore conservatism does seem to be on a pretty steep decline in the United States, but it's still a pretty substantial faction, and I mean that's pretty much still half of the GOPs.
Would you say that you're more socially liberal than most conservatives or like alt-right types?
Yes, I think that's pretty fair to say. I mean, I totally dislike and reject all that SJW crap, but obviously I want nothing to have to do with radical feminism or any of that sort of mores. But I'm a lot more socially liberal than the alt-right, I would say. Yes, I think my views are pretty much in line with those of the blogger who blogs at altleft.com. BW David. Although economically I'm pretty much centrist, so I think I'm further right economically than he is.
Yeah, there's a kind of a group of us, like well, myself, you, Anatoly, Rabbit, Alex von Goldstein, a Bay Area guy who we met up with in Berkeley. And I think we kind of exist in kind of that space, like kind of on the left wing of the alt-right, or kind of between the alt-right and the alt-left. I guess you could call us kind of like the alternative center.
Mm-hmm.
You also have an interest in transhumanism. Is that correct? About how the global future it'll be like. I kind of know about transhumanism, but
okay, yeah. Well, I should just point out that I sort of do like many of the ideas there, but I also recognize that there's also quite a bit of quackery there. So I would qualify with that. But in general, yes, I'm interested in futurism and then in modeling technological progress, and that's very much directly related to the sorts of things I blog about and I'm researching. So the links between technological growth and historical IQ levels and literacy rates and so on. So obviously this syncs very well with my interests, and I think that a lot of futurist ideas such as automation and even life extension, apart from being pretty cool, will also help to maintain the identity of our peoples, which is another goal that I do share with the alt-right.
Well, automation
it seems to be
It's kind of a mixed bag, because one scenario is that the elites use it and they decimate the middle class, but it could be a good thing if it's done the right way, if it's channeled towards a basic income. And then there's less of a need for mass third world immigration. So it could be a great thing if it's done the right way, but it could also be a disaster.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I would also point out that if once you start getting automation, then the relative value of the people who build the robots and write the software especially, it's going to continue rising, while the economic value of lower skilled people is going to continue falling. If you're like importing lots of immigrants from places like Somalia or whatever, where the average IQ is 75 or whatever, then it's just going to be this dead weight. So like maybe 1 in 1,000 of them is going to be actually useful in running this hyper-automated economy, while the rest are going to be a dead weight. So obviously there will be much less of a need or an argument to bring in to have this mass population replacement program that's currently ongoing.
With birth rate trends, a lot of people on the alt-right talk a lot about dysgenics, or they talk about the sort of idiocracy film scenario. Do you think automation could reverse that trend?
Well, I'm not sure, because ultimately fertility preferences are a personality trait, and all personality traits are heritable to some extent or another. I mean, I don't think they found a single one that isn't yet. So if I don't really see any obvious way of reversing that, instead, apart from either return to Malthusianism, like a farewell to arms, like a type of scenario where the poor start dying at faster rates than the rich, and you have this sort of selection like you had in medieval and early modern England, as described in the book A Farewell to Arms. So you'll have either that, or you have a technological solution such as CRISPR and improving intelligence through genetic methods. So I'm a humanitarian ultimately, and I don't want to return to Malthusianism. So I would obviously prefer the latter, but obviously opinions can differ. I understand that.
You wrote about birth rate trends in your article. You said that America is starting to resemble European style birth rates.
Well, I wouldn't say it resembles them yet. I mean, but I mean, there's been a drop in US fertility rates. Is
this just among whites, or this is among all groups as well?
Oh, actually, it was most announced among Hispanics. If you look at the statistics, presumably this is primarily on account of the collapse of the housing market. And so as I gather, mortgages started getting much harder to get, and the crisis also hit the southwest harder than other regions of the country. So yeah, mostly, I mean, most of the impact has been on Hispanics. I don't think white fertility is barely budged actually since relative to 2007.
Peter Brimelow made an interesting point in his one of his speeches. There's this whole kind of talk about a demographic change and the sort of inevitability of these changes, but the thing is, most of the demographic change is being driven through mass immigration. If we were to stabilize and dramatically reduce immigration levels, then I think birth rates would stabilize among all those groups, and we would have a more stable demographic in this country.
Mm-hmm. I think that's that's a reasonable viewpoint.
Just thinking about people and population and transhumanism. From what I've known about transhumanism is mostly from actually Rachel Haywire, and she just uses it in this like punk science fiction way where it's about turning into something that's actually not so human but advancing to the causes of beyond what you can do. And I think to myself that if people depend that much on technology and become these cyborg things, for population-wise, it seems to me then everybody should be cloned and actually authentically being reproduced. This to sound like facetious or something, but, it sounds to me that it's to the transhumanist ideal compared to population. It sounds almost like science fiction or some kind of, I don't know, unrealistic.
Okay, so Rachel Haywire, she's an interesting character. She's an artistic character. Okay, I wouldn't really treat anything of what she says about transhumanism too literally. Mm-hmm. I mean, just getting that out there. Like by transhumanism, futurism in general, I'm talking more about people like, Kurzweil is obviously one of them. Robin Hanson, the various writers about automation. Aubrey de Grey, who's researching life extension, and Google has also launched this company called Caliso a couple of years ago, which is doing the same thing. So there's actually money going out to these things. I'm actually pretty skeptical that you'll have these cyborg scenarios anytime soon, because actually integrating like linking brains with computers is actually pretty hard, because there's some specific reasons why it's hard. So the scales are different, and it's very, very not entirely clear how you're going to tie it together. I think what's far more likely in the short term is that you have like, speaking about more practical issues, in the shorter term, I think it was Razib Khan actually, and also Derbyshire, who's also a columnist at Dunes Review. So according to their projections, we're going to uncover the alleles for intelligence in about 5 years. So 2020 is like a commonly thrown out date. So the Chinese in particular are working really hard at the Beijing Genomics Institute. And there's also CRISPR technology, which allows much easier genetic editing of genes. So if you can combine those two technologies, then you could feasibly increase intelligence by a pretty big margin. So I mean, even today there's pretty big differences between even within the same country, between regions with an average IQ of 95, say West Virginia, and an average IQ of 103 or 104 or something, so Massachusetts. So that's already a huge difference, and it's even bigger when you look at the international level between countries. And if you could get a just one standard deviation increase in global IQ that's going to totally transform everything. If it's a couple of the standard deviations, then the world is going to become unrecognizable. It will probably become more peaceful, more civil. Technological progress will probably become much faster because there'll be a lot more bright people to work on problems. So I think that in the shorter term, so it will be very interesting observing how those technologies develop. In the longer term, the really big one and possibly the last major issue that humanity will face is the development of super intelligent computer systems. Again, there's different projections about when it will happen, but that will probably come after this biological revolution.
I interviewed Scott Jakic from the East Bay Futurist Meetup. You put me in touch with him, and you're involved with his meetup. Is there a big futurist scene specifically in the Bay Area?
That is, yes. I mean, I would say it's actually perhaps the primary futurist scene in the world because you have all these techies and also a pretty big concentration of various artistic types and even sci-fi writers and all sorts of people in between those sorts of nodes. And yes, I've met some very interesting characters through that who are working on some very interesting problems.
And what's interesting about California and the Bay Area is that even though it's sort of seen as a kind of a center for kind of the establishment left, it also produces a lot of interesting intellectuals. I mean, you mentioned that like Ron Unz, who runs Unz Reviews in the Bay Area, and your article also points out that a lot of these like alt-left thinkers are from the West Coast.
So ironically, all three of the Unz Reviews bloggers were based in California. So Steve Saylor, he's in LA, I think. Don Unz is in the Bay Area. I was in the Bay Area until recently, and so was the Zeeb Han, although the Zeeb is now leaving the Unz Review and has also left California. But so you have that sort of a lot of NRX, Neo Reaction is there. The Machine Intelligence Research Institute, Eliza Yudkowsky and Les Dongan, all those people, that's mostly California and especially the Bay Area. There's Hank Pelissier, who's been very active in running conferences on both intelligence research and on futurism, actually. There's effective altruism probably has the biggest node in the BayArea. There's even a guy called Mike Johnson who's attempting to quantify consciousness, to approach consciousness in a scientific way.
We ran into him when we were in Berkeley.
Yeah, how did that go, by the way?
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation after you left for about a half an hour.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, the Bay Area is the sort of place where you just randomly run into all sorts of different, strange but interesting people.
There was also that guy Stark had on a show who ran for president as a transhumanist, Zoltan.
Oh, Zoltan.
Zoltan Islam, yes.
Did you ever see one of his rallies or got to meet him in person?
I met him in person a few times actually. I guess it's good that he's getting out there, but I've heard some rumors about his campaign that he was planning, if he was going to get popularity, become more popular, than he was planning to throw his support behind Hillary Clinton. Some rumors I heard about that. Which, if that is true, then
interesting about him is that he'll do interviews with anyone. Like he was on like a Red Ice Radio, which is they're basically like white nationalists. Yes. But at the same time, his personal views are he's more like pro globalization.
Yeah, and he's also like really socially liberal as well. So like in a very very strange combination. So like so I don't know. Have you read his book, The Transhuman Wager?
No.
Transhumanist Wager. Okay, so it's basically okay, like a lot of people liked it. It's popular. So according to the reviews, it's a good book. I read it. I thought it was mostly a sort of rehash of Ayn Rand with futurist themes, and some of the scenarios there, frankly, struck me as rather implausible. So I don't know. I mean, I like what Zoltan is doing, but I question the way he approaches it sometimes. And he toured for his campaign. He was touring the United States in a bus in the shape of a coffin. So I mean, if people see you campaigning with that sort of bus, then they're going to think you're a weirdo. They're not going to vote for you.
Well, especially that is like he has a wife who's a scientist, and it seems like it's the scientist party as a political position. If the normative person didn't know what transhumanism was, it sounds like the party for science fiction and science. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I mean, judging from that bus, they think it was more of some kind of weird cult, actually.
So in your article, Your American Decade, you write reviews of all the places you've lived and visited. I think to start off with, can you talk about your time in the SF area?
So this is where I spent most of my time, and so I went to university there, and that was where I lived for the most part in Berkeley, and then at the end a year in San Leandro. I enjoyed making all these sorts of acquaintances and friendships and exploring all these ideas floating around the area. It's also geographically very very superlative. So as you know, you can. This is the sort of place where you can go to the beach and you can go skiing within a single day. So that's pretty cool as well.
It's very expensive, and I know. I know like conservatives like to bash San Francisco, but despite that, it really is. If you have a lot of money, it's probably the best place to live in the country.
I agree with that. Yeah.
One thing that is like remarkable about San Francisco is a place like LA, where I grew up in LA. It's just really spread out, and you can drive like miles and miles and see nothing but like urban sprawl. And where I live now, Santa Barbara, it's a really nice place, but it's also, I feel it's too kind of isolated and low energy. What I like about that area, just from my last trip, is like you can be in like San Francisco and feel like you're in a big city. And even in Berkeley is very much like it kind of reminds me of a lot of European cities in the sense that it's very kind of a small, compact, walkable, energetic, but it also has some of the most remarkable wilderness of any major city.
So they struck a good balance. I mean, you made a comparison to European cities. I actually think that San Francisco still has a way to go, in particular, but the metro system there is woefully, well, it's too expensive for its quality, and it also doesn't reach a lot of places, including in the city of San Francisco itself. So it really has to be expanded, but with the sort of political gridlock that's characteristic of California in general, I really don't see it happening until 2050, maybe at best.
I took the BART system. I mean, being from LA has some of the worst public transit.
Well,
so my
standards
are
pretty
low. But I mean, I took the BART from Walnut Creek to Berkeley. And I have some complaints, like there's a transfer station in Oakland, it's kind of confusing because you have to go underneath the platform and you can miss your train. They also had an incident where I put my ticket in the machine and the machine ate my ticket. And then, I mean, there's obviously there's a lot of homeless people using it, and there's obviously problems.
So yes, I mean it's not a very good quality system. So it's the richer people mostly don't use it. That also accentuates further the quality problems.
It's better than, by my standards, it wasn't that bad.
Well, yeah, I mean by LA standards, well, obviously, yeah. I mean that goes without saying. But by European standards, it's nothing to write home about, though.
In LA, only poor people take public transit. Like when I took the BART, I noticed you had homeless people and poor black people from Oakland. But I also noticed you do see some wealthier people in the suburbs using it as well.
Mm-hmm. So a good guide though is that generally speaking, according to my observations across the United States, it really depends on when the city was built as to the quality of its public transport system. If it was primarily built prior to in the 19th century, so that's Boston, obviously, New York, Chicago, even. I think Chicago actually had the earliest metro or metro-like system in the United States. They've got pretty good transport systems. And the 20th century cities built primarily by the time the age of the automobile came down. So LA, Phoenix.
I think BART was built. Well, San Francisco's BART was built in the 70s, and LA didn't really start their subway system till the 90s.
Okay, wait a second. And San Francisco actually developed primarily in between those two eras. And I would say that its public transport system is also somewhere in between what you get in the eastern cities, in the big eastern cities, which are reminiscent of what you might have in a lot of European places, and where it is non-existent, such as Phoenix and LA and so on.
I'm a big supporter of investing in infrastructure like subway systems and rail systems. Why do you think conservatives are so hostile to it? Do you think it's economic reasons, or do you think it's more demographic reasons, like they associate mass transit with maybe certain demographic groups they don't want to associate with?
I think it's both. I mean, primarily there's these economic arguments they have in public, but psychologically, maybe I fully allow that they might also exert some hidden psychological influence, just like liberals ask about whether a region has good schools when they're moving to it, whereas in reality, we know that they're probably talking about living in something else when they ask about that. So probably both reasons, really.
Well, most conservatives are global warming deniers. Liberals obviously deny science on HBD and gender differences, but I think conservatives deny science on global warming.
Yeah, it's political tribalism. Scott Alexander had a pretty good article on that. I think it was the red tribe and the blue tribe. So basically, you have a set of positions that you associate with, no matter how ridiculous they might be, and so, but subscribing to them is a sort of mark of loyalty to the in-group to which you belong. So I think global warming denialism is really something that's curiously specific to the Anglosphere, and especially the United States. It's not really something that's a prominent or really at all a feature of conservatism in Europe, for instance.
Do you see trends in the future where you could people could sort of move beyond that and take some of the best ideas of both sides, combining, some level of HBD and immigration restriction with accepting global warming and like investing in a mass transit?
I think it's possible, certainly. Why not? But and I mean, some people are already doing it in some way, I guess. So the old left, the BW rabbit, Robert Lindsay, I guess. Okay. Well, I mean, you know what? So they say that global warming is this invention that of frequently contested to the scale about global cooling, especially in the 70s or whatever. So but actually the first person to connect carbonic acid or CO2 in the atmosphere with the levels of greenhouse gas like that in the atmosphere with global temperatures was actually Svante Arrhenius, who was a Swedish guy in the late 19th century. I believe that paper was actually published in 1896. That's like not even last century, but the century before that. And the best thing is, though, that not only did he sort of create the world's first climate model, but he also sort of supported the idea of global warming because he wanted Sweden to become this Mediterranean place. And he also supported eugenics.
Obviously, global warming would screw over most of the world, but places like Russia and Canada, do you think they could benefit from it?
Obviously, yeah. I mean, I had some articles like a few years ago about that specific topic. I think, I mean, people say that so like it will in the short term it might lose out because a lot of the permafrost is going to melt. So a lot of the structures in the Arctic, such as bridges and houses, are going to sink into the ground and will depreciate quite rapidly once the permafrost starts thawing. But in the long term, it will become much warmer in the Arctic, and you can have large scale agriculture and population sizes, carrying capacity increases. So in that terms, like on the scale of even a century, I think it's going to be a pretty massive positive for Russia, global warming.
This ties in with kind of the theme of immigration and environment, but on my last trip to the Bay Area, I drove around the different suburbs, and I noticed if you go to like the majority white cities, like Lafayette, you see a lot more nature and open space. But if you go to these cities like Dublin, which are filled with like Southern California style tract housing and overdevelopment, they're largely immigrants. What are your observation on like how immigration relates to the environment?
I can't really say I've traveled a lot in those places, but I mean, concern for the environment seems to be a function of wealth, of intelligence, and of altruism and concern for the common weal. So I think it's natural that it's going to be relatively high amongst the populations of primarily Northwest and North European extraction, and it's going to trend in the opposite direction when you start going east and south. And I think that all makes sense, really.
What about the Amtrak and the towns visiting?
So Amtrak, so America has this. I'd even call it a national treasure, but few Americans seem to be aware of it. So you can travel for Amtrak at prices which aren't really any more expensive than air flights, although it takes a lot longer, obviously. But I think it's a pretty good experience traveling by train throughout the country. You get to see more of it.
I've taken Amtrak, but it's my only complaint is that there's a lot of stops. Like it's very. I've taken it from. I've taken it from LA to Santa Barbara, and it's okay, but there's a lot of stops when the trains have to pass other trains. And then basically there's no transit from LA to San Francisco. You basically have to take like a Greyhound type bus from downtown LA to Bakersfield, and then take the Amtrak from Bakersfield to Oakland. So we just don't really seriously invest in transit the way that like Europe does.
Okay, I haven't done that, but like in 2013, I did take Amtrak for quite a long distance. It was from San Francisco to Seattle, from Seattle to Chicago, then on to Pittsburgh, Washington D.C., New York, Boston, all those places, then back to Chicago, and then across the Rocky Mountains back to San Francisco.
Yeah, I will have to say, it's funny you gave Pittsburgh the lowest score, 3 out of 10. I have to agree. I have to agree too. I live in the Pennsylvania area. I live in Philadelphia, but I've been to like Pittsburgh twice, and yeah, other than their hockey team, there's literally like in the middle of Pennsylvania, and it's just like nothing goes on there, and it's kind of like it is all forest. That's one thing about Pennsylvania, but if you're like really stuck in one of those Midwest cities. Especially like, I don't know, Topeka, Kansas, there's literally nothing you can do, or at least that you suffer through some kind of strange Midwest culture. I don't know what to make of it, though, but I always feel like, you can't really do anything out there.
Okay. Well, I mean, my experience was covered. I mean, I had a pretty bad altercation with a policeman when I arrived there because he thought I was a homeless person or something, I think.
That's annoying.
So he threatened to arrest me if I don't move on. Okay, that was a bad start to my relationship with Pittsburgh.
You wrote about Vegas in your article. What are some of your favorite places to visit in Vegas?
So I like poker. So I like going around the poker rooms and the fishiest places generally, like where the way. So like with poker you have the so-called fish, which are the people who like lose money, and you have the sharks, which gobble up money. So I prefer to be at the places where there's a higher fish to shark ratio, because I lose less money or win more money, depending on the day. Out of all those places, I think my favorites were Bill's Gambling Hall and the Stratosphere.
Bill's Gambling Hall, I think.
Yeah.
It had kind of a cool like a 70s aesthetic.
Yeah, it has a really distinctive aesthetic.
Rabbit and I, we stayed at the Flamingo, and that was right next door. They actually tore down Bill's Gambling Hall. Isn't
Flamingo like a dump or something?
It's so-so.
Okay.
And Stratosphere is a cool place, but it's kind of in an odd location, like it's in the middle of the ghetto, like far away from everything.
Oh yeah, that's the one thing. But the rooms are pretty nice for the price, and you also got those rides. But if I was going to stay there in one place, I'd probably stay at Bill's Gambling Hall. The Luxor, which is the famous pyramid place. It was interesting to observe for one day, to stay there for one day, but I wouldn't stay there any longer than 1 or 2 days.
Have you been inside like the Paris and the Wynn?
Yes, I have been. Yes, I actually stayed at the Palace for one night. It was so-so. The Wynn was very obviously upscale.
What's interesting about Las Vegas, and Rabbit and I kind of agreed on this, is that on one hand, it's kind of a symbolic of sort of the excesses of like American capitalism and commercialism. But at the same time, it is this place. It does have this like otherworldly, like a fantasy feel to it. And then you have like all the different theme resorts, the different like lighting, and it's also in the sort of the natural location of the mountains.
Of course, by being so artificial, it becomes a sort of monument in itself. Ironically enough, becomes authentic to its lack of authenticity. I do really like poker, so like if chess is the Russian game and Go is the East Asian game, the Chinese game, then poker would be the quintessential American game. But unlike chess, or even unlike Go, where computers have started beating people in chess, it happened almost 2 decades ago. In Go, it has happened a couple of last year. With poker, none of that has been happening yet.
Well, I've never been to Vegas, but what I know about in textbook and history, I mean, one, it's out in the middle of a desert. It barely rains, so you need water to get over there. And plus, with the Hoover Dam, it creates electricity, hence giving the reason everybody to go out in the middle of the desert to go have fun and do hedonistic stuff.
So, Anatoly, you visited New York and Chicago.
Mhm.
What have been some of your
Washington,
observations?
D.C. So in brief, I actually did really like Chicago. I don't know if it's an impression that will stay with me, but basically um, it's really compact. The people I found to be more genuine or authentic than in many other places. Although it was a pretty fleeting impression, so I can't really make too big of a conclusion on that side. Washington D.C. was a swamp. I mean, like climatically,
Literally
it's a
and
swamp.
figuratively.
Yeah, and figuratively and actually literally, it's got some very good restaurants, obviously, but because of all the lobbyists and the politicians. But otherwise, it's I certainly probably wouldn't want to be there for any for longer than it takes to
thoughts
visit
on the
museums.
recent MPI event? I know you met up with Richard Spencer briefly in Berkeley when he had his event there.
So I support. I mean, I do like Richard Spencer. I think he's way more hardcore than I am on his alt-rightism. But he didn't do nothing wrong, as they say.
Yep.
I'm in the same boat. Like, I'm probably like a lot more moderate than he is, but I'm cool with having him on, and I support like what he's doing.
I think he was just joking with the whole Pepe and the heel thing. It was just because everyone.
Well, he didn't even do the heel. He said "Hail Trump," and then there were some guys in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to the speeches. Like, all the MPI speeches were totally reasonable. It's just that one photo op that was taken by the Atlantic was used, and it was used as like that PR.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like, the speeches themselves were perfectly like reasonable.
Yeah.
To be frank, I mean, I don't see what any of those like disavowals or whatever, which some people were making a show of doing, like what purpose they serve. I mean, I've got to ask them. I mean, disavowing might have been understandable like a year ago, but dude, has Trump not taught you anything this past year?
Yeah, Trump never apologizes.
Exactly.
And it's
yes.
You've written about New York and Chicago, and a lot of people don't know this. Chicago was where the first skyscrapers were built. Most people assume New York City. And I know where you are right now. Currently, London is building a lot of skyscrapers. Are you a fan of skyscrapers in general, and do you have some personal favorites?
Well, not really. I mean, I think a lot of the time they really displace the authentic old structures of a city and overshadow them. And it doesn't help that a lot of the time that they're like these big monstrosities that are monuments to an ideology of capitalism, of globalization. So I'm not a big fan of them in general. I'd prefer smaller scale structures, which are more livable, more like integrated with the existing urban layouts. And
what do you think about like the older ones, like the Empire State Building and Chrysler Building, and some of the, even San Francisco has some of those type of buildings?
They're a lot better than what came after. I mean, the low point, as in most of architecture, was the 70s, 80s, where you have these really blonde glass and steel and concrete buildings.
It's funny you mentioned that. Is Pilleater and I were talking about the architect John Portman, who designed the Embarcadero Center in San Francisco and the Hyatt. And I mean, I'm actually a big fan of that kind of like 70s futurism. Pilleater, you saw those pictures I sent you.
Yes, I mean, I would like to see them. I just haven't been there. I mean, architecture is really interesting, especially from him. It looks very futuristic, or at least some kind of, at least an Asian aesthetic to it.
Also, I know Rabbit's really into that kind of like 70s futurism. He said his ideal city would like resemble like Logan's Run.
Okay, mine wouldn't. Let's put it that way.
Colin Liddell said he lives in Tokyo and it looks like Akira or something.
Oh yeah.
That too.
I mean, I wouldn't want that like everywhere, but I guess it would be cool to have like one district of the city that was like Akira.
Yeah, I mean, Akira's dystopian. It's actually the negative, not a positive thing. I don't know, depending how you taste it. I think it's more of a negative thing, but that's me.
I know like a lot of these alt-right types, like they really like, they all like say, oh, they hate like brutalism and modern architecture. But I mean, I think some of the brutalist stuff is pretty cool.
I mean, I like brutalist bunkers, I guess, but because they sort of fit the theme. But otherwise, they.
Oh, you're talking about the brutalist subway systems.
Yeah. Okay. I actually sort of did have a small degree of appreciation for the Washington D.C. subway. I thought that the really concretey, really dark atmosphere was sort of had a certain thematic attraction to it. But otherwise, I obviously don't want any brutalism above ground. It's like a very Moloch type architecture, I'd say. Should be kept on the ground.
You wrote about LA briefly, and I'm from LA. Like, what was some of your impressions of the city? You said, I mean, you were kind of pointing out it's kind of synonymous with like a trashy Hollywood culture, and that, I mean, that doesn't appeal to me, but a lot of people are enamored by that.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, obviously, if you're rich, if you're in the world of fashion and entertainment, then it's going to be a pretty good place for you. And it's got some you can enjoy it as a tourist for a couple of days. So I went to the Universal Studios theme park when I was there. I had no idea that such things existed. Actually, it was a new experience for me, and I found it to be pretty cool. I didn't know some people had developed this sort of thing where you combine 3D movies with shaking chairs and up and down motion, and quite enjoy that. And but otherwise, yeah, I probably wouldn't want to live there for more than a week or so.
And I mean, you were kind of joking that like their main landmark is like the Hollywood sign. If you compare that to San Francisco's like Coit Tower and the Golden Gate Bridge, it's kind of a joke. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's the sort of place you go to take off a place on your bucket list and then file it away and forget about it, frankly.
And the thing is, like a city like San Francisco, like all the important parts of it are pretty much within like walking distance. You can't really get by in LA without a car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I took my car when I was there. Obviously, going there by train is not a great idea.
I guess one last question is, America is a remarkable country for its natural beauty, from places like Yosemite to the Grand Canyon. Mm-hmm. How would you compare America's natural beauty to Europe and Russia?
There's probably a greater concentration of it. You do indeed have Yosemite, you have Yellowstone, you have the Everglades in Florida, and I mean, one issue is that Americans are richer, and so a lot of these places are more commercialized. It's you actually have to get permits to travel to some of them in advance, and I think you'd have much less issues with that in Russia, in some place like Russia, say. I think a lot of places have a lot of natural beauty to them. It's obviously not something that's specific to the United States, but it's easier in the United States to visit these places. But it comes also at the cost of them being more commercialized, more people there visiting as well. So hell is other people as wise ass once the mark.
What are your favorite wilderness areas to visit in the Bay Area?
Well, specifically in the Bay Area, I don't really, I never really explored the wildernesses of the Bay Area very much. I mean, the hilllands around Berkeley, like pretty much fulfill my needs in that respect. Like whenever I
Are you
felt the
talking
urge,
about
I prefer to go to the mountains actually, like especially in winter because I like skiing. But I'm not a big nature explorer in the Bay Area itself.
Yeah, I mean, I like cities too. When I also like, this might sound weird, like the wilderness too. I like, instead of getting the metropolitan area, I do like going out into the parks and seeing places, especially in Pennsylvania. There is a lot of places like the Poconos where it's just forest and river.
Is that an extension of the Appalachians?
Yeah, it's like, I have good memories there where it's just you're in a cabin in the woods. You might see brown bears or something, but I guess some people get really connected to their place, I mean, outside of a city, where a city is the place of commerce and popularity, and outside civilization would be like strange places. Like, I know for one, my cousins live in New Orleans, and I know that's a major city, but it's also below sea level, and it's like, there's literally like, it's flat, there's pelicans, there's marshes, but it has its own mystique to it. And I always think that people are really connected to where their environment is. An environment has something really to do how a person grows up in that environment, and there's really everywhere to be called a place.
Anatoly Karlin, we're at the end of this show. It's been an excellent show. Thanks for being on.
Okay, thank you for having me on.
And also, thanks, Pilleater.
Nice talking to you. It's been a good